Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Data Nerd Herd.
Hey, how's it
Yeah,
going?
data nerd herd.
Yeah, this would be fun. Today we got Demetrios Brinkmann and David Aponte from the MLOps community. Do you guys want to take a bit of time and introduce yourselves?
Sure.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
let
I'm gonna go first,
David
Demetrius.
do the honors.
Sounds good. All right. So for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is David Aponte. I currently work as a machine learning engineer, working on infrastructure, and I'm also a co-host, a content creator, and organizer in the MLOps community with Demetrios.
Oh, you're so much more than that, man. You're so much more than that. But I'll leave it at that, and I will introduce myself as Demetrios Brinkmann. As mentioned before, I am one of the creators of the MLOps community, which is now going on pretty strong. We've been in business, or we've been a community for the last year, and things are great, man. Things have been really cool, and I'm excited to be here, Joe. I want to
That's cool.
know, are we going to get some of these graphic designs in the thumbnail?
Some of the
Or
graphic.
like, you
Oh,
know what I'm
sorry. Which?
talking about? The graphic designer that you do on the Monday data show.
Oh, the new cartoon sketches.
Yeah, I want to know, are
Yeah.
we going to get that?
I might be able to arrange something actually. That would be kind of fun.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. Sorry, it took me a bit to jog my memory. I was like, the graphics behind me or the graphics? Yeah, okay. I'm slow. Yeah. Yeah, that might be kind of fun. I'll make a note of that.
That's it's awesome. I saw it the other day on your channel and was like, "Ooh, this is new. This is cool. I liked
Hmm.
it."
Yep. Yeah.
I'm interested now. I haven't seen that, but I'm interested now.
Yeah, yeah. For the Monday morning data chats that my business partner Matt and I do, we decided we'd get a cartoon made of us. Yeah, strangely enough, you can just hop on Fiverr and people just make cartoons of you for a very low price. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
which is
awesome.
awesome. Yeah, it's a pretty cool value. How did you guys meet?
So
So,
I'll start with that. So I joined. This is during like middle of the pandemic. It just started, and no more meetups were going on. It was kind of like everyone was trying to figure out what's the best way to move forward and like do cool things like that. And I found the MLOps community just through some random googling, and knew that he was doing these meetups. Joined the Slack channel, and I don't know when this happened, Demetrius, but at some point, we stopped getting support from Dot Science, or I forget the name of the company.
hmm yep.
And I was like, man, it's just this one guy doing all this stuff. It's really cool. There's a lot of potential here. Let me just reach out to him. And so I just shot him a DM. I said, hey, man, do you need any help with anything? He's like, absolutely, bro. And so, we hit it off, and that started a very fruitful relationship that now turned into a business relationship. And yeah, we first was just so easy to get along. Demetrius is a great guy, and so that it was just easy to just talk about things, and one thing led to the other. And we're like, hey, let's just record like you talking about something, and let's like explaining something.
Yep.
I'm like, all right, let's do it. And we just got more ideas, and the more that we started pushing content out there, the more that we started working together as a business. I'm like, all right, let's how do we organize this? How do we really make this thing grow and become something really awesome. But that's my intro to how I met Demetrius.
That's exactly how I remember it too. And David is good because he brings the feet on the ground perspective when my head's in the sky. I'm like, oh, we could do this, we could do that. And he's like, bro, let's just focus on the first step. And then we'll get to that one in a year or two or a decade. And yeah, when he reached out, it's like you mentioned, we were at this point where we were pushing, or I was pushing out, trying to push out a ton of content and just get it started because I knew that nobody would really have heard of us since it was so new. And I wanted to make sure that we were getting people to meetups and we were getting people to watch the meetups that we were having. But then when I was talking to David, he was like bringing this technical aspect that I didn't have, because I will preface this conversation with the fact that I do not come from a tech background. And so then he was teaching me a bunch of stuff. And like he said, we just hit record one day, and I was like, dude, Kubeflow is pretty popular now. Like, I noticed that a lot of people are talking about it in the community, and when we have meetups around Kubeflow, there's more people that come to those meetups. So can you tell me what's going on with Kubeflow? And he was like, oh yeah, sure. Here, check out this demo. And he whipped up a demo. And so that was how it started. And it's only gone up from there.
Yeah, your growth has been impressive to watch. I mean, your Slack group alone, I think it's what, almost 3,000 members now?
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Getting there.
somewhere around there. Yeah, I think it's like
Yeah.
2,800 or something. I don't know. We can
Yeah,
check.
that's crazy. I
Crazy.
mean, props to you guys for building I think a really legitimately strong community and an active one too, in the matter of basically under a year, it seems like. So,
I wish
um,
I'm sure. Obviously, like like we definitely play a part in that. But I feel like it wasn't me. Like just like awesome people came and started having awesome conversations and answering
Yeah.
questions. That happened so organically, and thankfully that's how it turned out. We didn't have to prod too much. We just had to, I guess, put the right environment, and good people came. And yeah, I just want to preface that. Yeah, I think that when I think of the success or these cool ideas that are coming out of that, it's really sourced from within. Like
mhm.
we're just kind of making the most out of what we see there. I think is one way I see our role in this community.
And you know how you know how I know it wasn't me that had anything to do with that is because I tried to do it for a different topic, and it didn't really work, and there wasn't that much growth. I tried to start this data on Kubernetes community, and that's been pretty stagnant. And I did the same things, and I was trying to like get the same movement going, but it didn't have the impact that the MLOps community has had. And that is one of the reasons that I stay very humble with this. When people are like, wow, you've done a great job. It's like, I didn't do much here. This is its own monster that just took off. And I'm trying to at least go with the flow.
It seems like it was a good intersection of timing and luck, though, right? Because you had COVID, for better or for worse. It did spawn a lot of online communities that I personally don't think would have happened. I mean, I've done physical meetups for years now and organized several of those. And um, I know in my own events, even though they're called like the Utah Data Engineering Meetup and the Salt Lake City Python, we get people from all over the world now showing up. So there's a timing aspect of COVID where like boundaries and geography is sort of meaningless. And I think at the same time, what you saw was, well, I think what you're seeing actually in real time is ML ops and ML engineering is finally becoming its own thing, right? And so it's just the confluence of those two things. I think like really, it's like lightning in a bottle for you guys. So
Yeah, that's a good point. That along this time, a lot of things have changed. Or I think machine learning engineering has matured. Even though that's not what we're only about. I think it encompasses lots of other disciplines. But there people have a better idea of what an ML engineer does now. I think, and I don't know if it has anything to do with the community. Maybe just the types of content that I see, the types of people that I talk to. But I definitely get that sense that there is a sense of like that maturity has also been timely, right? Like at the same time that we've matured as a community. So I think, yeah, that definitely played a part in that.
mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think the litmus test I use too is like how active is the group, and I belong to several data Slack groups. I think yours is, I will say, definitely the most active that I've seen, just from the level of engagement, the number of channels that have recent posts and stuff. So that's pretty cool.
It's so hard to read everything. Like I try to go through every channel. Like when someone introduces himself, like, hey, how you doing? Try the start up those side conversations. But yeah, like there's so much going on that it like Demetrios said, it really developed into its own beast. Like it's its own thing now, and like he was saying, I guess the best part is nurturing that, making sure that stays healthy, because that's part of the role that we play too. As we have lots of vendors, lots of open source people, so there's like this, you have to care for it, so it definitely has happened organically, but we definitely play a part in making sure that it stays healthy, it stays what we want. I guess not what we want it to be, but what I think we appreciate about it.
What do you think makes a good community?
Oh man, I've thought about this quite a bit. And like the common, so it's like it's so hard to define, but there's like this common thing that you're all trying to get or help each other with. I think there are a lot of communities out there that are active but are a little bit toxic, and I feel like more so in more mature fields. Like I think about like the DevOps field, not calling out any specific communities, but since it's more mature and you've had like more time for everything to be tainted, it's not like as nice and welcoming of a vibe as you will see sometimes with like the MLOps community. And so that is huge. Like the feeling that you have that you can ask questions and you're going to not be laughed at or you're not going to be ridiculed. That's like, for me, the base. What I want to really make sure is kept, like, because and I feel like I do that just by the fact that I don't have that tech background. So everything is new to me. Like every question is valid. Doesn't matter if you're asking what, XYZ is, or what's the best, best way to do this or that. Because at the end of the day, we all have to start from somewhere. So it's that, A, like the freedom to ask questions, and then B, like what are we trying to do and how can we do that together in a way that you feel like a little bit of like, yeah, I'm part of the community, I contribute to it. And so you see a lot of communities. It's really interesting because the MLOps community doesn't have a certain project behind it. Like it's not like we're an open source community that's working on a like tool, right? So in that sense, it's a bit different than most communities that have like a company behind them or an open source project that they're working on and trying to advance. And so that is a little bit different, but I still feel like we have common goals, which are like trying to demystify this whole space and helping people understand the space, and helping, because some people might be really smart or they might be experts in one area, but they don't know much about the other area, and vice versa, right? So finding that space to have those ideas come together, or have the experts work with each other, or the non-experts, like I mentioned before, that's another thing that I've thought about, and that in my mind makes a nice community. Like it gives the good vibe, and then the playfulness and the fun. I think David comments on this a lot, is like trying to make it not just math equations or that kind of thing, like making sure that there's enough playfulness and there's enough fun that's involved so it doesn't feel like work.
Those are really good points. It's got to be fun.
Yeah, you said so many good things, man. I just want to kind of bounce off the something that unites us is like, yeah, we're all trying to solve difficult machine learning problems at scale and in production. A lot of people, that's what they come there for. Like, hey, I'm dealing with this stuff. I'm building this system. I'm working on these problems. And there's nothing like there's no one place where I could find kind of different perspectives that will inform that same problem. And that's, I do agree that makes it a little bit unique in the sense that we're not necessarily, we're Mlflow community, very active community as well. They're united by the fact that they're working on the same ecosystem, right? And they're invested in it. And that same sort of investment you see in the machine learning ops space, because they're interested in learning how to solve some of these very challenging problems. Some that are, again, depending on where you're at in a company, what sort of maturity you have. But there's still validity there. Like if you're just starting, like how do I think about collecting data, to how do I think about deploying this into the real world, to how do I think about process and this cultural aspect of things. All of that, again, like Demetrios is saying, like no one person has, I think, a full perspective on all of that, and so that's why this in data science is a mixture of so many different fields, right? Machine learning is a lot of different fields that have inspired it. that I think you kind of needed that, like this multidisciplinary sort of group of people that are focused on the same sort of challenges. Like we're trying to productionize this, we're trying to bring research ideas into to make them available to end users. And that right there is a common problem, but like, again, it looks so different in different states. You have like different stages you have different problems at different stages of it. But I do think that's a good point, Demetrios, that we're united in that sense. Like we're all like, we're very interested in like learning something and bringing it to work and like making an impact in our day-to-day things.
Yeah. And to that point, a little more even, like we don't right now as a community, as like a greater MLOps discipline, there aren't that many books on it, right? And there's not that much clarity around it. So I think that's something huge that you're speaking to, David. It's like, where can I go if I want to learn about this stuff? And if it's not a specific Kubeflow question and I can't go to the Kubeflow Slack, like where can I go? Who can I talk to? And maybe I have people at work, but maybe I'm the guy at work that people are looking to. Like you're the one who's supposed to know how to solve this problem. So Googling it and checking out Stack Overflow only gets you so far.
Reminds me a lot of where machine learning was kind of back in the maybe the early 2010s, where it was becoming a really popular thing. And there's a lot of interest in model building and all this other stuff. And it seems like now, okay, so back then people were still trying to figure out, I think, just best ways to build models even. And so, and I would say it's in a much different place, today than it was back then. And which is kind of cool because now everyone gets to now figure out the engineering aspect of machine learning, where that probably wasn't a practical discussion for the general machine learning population back in the day. Now you can start doing it. But it's interesting seeing it sort of play out in real time, because I think you guys are absolutely right. There isn't an expert who truly understands, that I've seen, truly understands like the entire end to end. I mean, maybe there are, maybe some of the big companies, but I'd say it's also particular to that company. And it's really difficult to generalize from like a Google to, a company that's not Google. It's probably much smaller, right? But you saw this happening with model building, where at least for the most part, models, the frameworks exist either through AutoML or packages and libraries where you can build models for a variety of use cases. And it's, in a variety of different company types now. So fascinating to see where it goes. I'd like to get your opinions on kind of the field.
That is something that has been echoed, I feel like, a few times in different interviews that we've done, where people are like, oh, the model building part, that's not the hard part anymore. And like you said, like it was maybe a decade ago, right? But now it's moved and it's shifted from these people that were at the cutting edge building the models to now, okay, the model has been, that like nut has been cracked, we could say. I'm not saying that it's easy by any means, right? Let's just make that very clear. I'm not saying that it doesn't have its place, because there are still really, really great things being done. But for the majority of companies, that's not where they're running into problems, right? So it feels like the problems are coming when you need to take those models and do something with them, and then actually put them out there and get business value from them.
Yeah, sorry, there's some like sirens in the background, so if you hear that, I apologize. But yeah, I think that's a good point. Like in 2010, I was just graduating from high school, so I don't even think I was thinking about machine learning at that time. But one thing I have noticed, in my limited time working in this industry, is that it's maybe even taking a step back. One thing I've noticed in other industries is going back to basics, and how sometimes looking at it's the same problem, just like in a new way, in a new light. And like, for example, one thing that I've been paying attention to a lot is like this emphasis on the data. Like we love models, we love model building, we love deploying those models, but what about the data? And what the data and how that relates to the model building before and after, during, all of these different things, and monitoring and like, tracking these things. Again, these are old problems, I think, but now where a lot of companies are at, that's maybe a different stage of maturity, where, okay, we have an algorithm that could solve some problem, right? Some classification problem, some regression problem, something. Now we need to actually make it available. we weren't at that stage for a while, right? Like we were still at trying out what was possible. Computer vision was something that was like so new not that long ago, right? And now it's like standardized. There's a lot of things you can even use a managed service from some of these cloud providers, and that's one thing I have noticed in terms of like where things are going. That machine learning engineers, people who are data scientists, who tend to love just the model and component, now have to care about all these other things as well, in particular the data. And that's, again, I feel like an old thing, right? Data mining has been around for some time now, right? Statistics has been around for some time now, but maybe now we're at that level of like, okay, now we can try to collect data in real time. Now, like, we're getting so much of things, and how do we maintain consistency? And how does, again, like, it's like the same problem, just manifested in, I guess, a different context, I think. But that's just, again, my limited perspective. So I would love to hear actually from other people where they think the MLOps space is going. I think it's going to be more on the data, but that's just me.
That's, something interesting. I guess it totally validates your point, is if you look at all the money flowing into these startups that are trying to solve these problems, right? And there's a lot of, I hear talk about like the data layer for ML, and it's that you're talking about. It's exactly that. I don't know, Joe, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, quite a few. So I think the data problem has been, I'd say, the most conspicuous one since day one, really. I mean, I got my start in machine learning back in the early 2010s, working actually at an auto ML startup back in the day. So I think I saw like firsthand, and this was like very early. There was barely any frameworks at all for anything. So you kind of had to make all this shit up in real time. But the problems were, especially when you're dealing with structured data problems, and we kind of hit on this in the podcast that we did with the MLOps group a few months ago, but structured data is gnarly because it's human generated, right? And so I would say by comparison, problems of like computer vision, for example, and natural language, that's actually, I'm going to go out on a limb and I would say that's easier than dealing with structured data. For the reason that when you're dealing with images, for example, right, you're dealing with a square, and you can just literally unwind it and then feed it into a neural net. Structured data it has some peculiarities to it where there's not really any rhyme or reason to how it's structured, right? And so you can do tricks like trying to standardize columns and do all this and that, but there's still, it's interesting when you look at how deep learning works on structured data, for example. It actually does a pretty shit job. So because it can't figure out, I mean, it's difficult to figure out the patterns, and like classical methods might actually do somewhat better. But again, taking it back to the data end of things, just processing that data, extracting features of it, I still think it's still a very open-ended problem that's, I think now being, there's a lot of companies, I think, taking stabs at it from bits and pieces, but at the end of the day, you still have data quality issues you got to deal with, right? And until that's automated by some sort of algorithm, that ain't going away. And even if it is automated, I don't know. I mean, it's, as long as humans, I think, are generating data, it's just kind of how, you're going to have these problems.
And I was just going to comment on two things. So one, about following the money, right? Like my wife, she works in law, and one of the lessons that she learned is follow the money where it goes. You could learn a lot about like what people care about, and where the bad things are happening or where the good things are happening by following the money and the investment. And in this space, I see a lot around things like data labeling, right? And it's related to what you're saying, where humans are in the loop. That's like not so easy to automate. And even if you could automate it, the quality of that is still like a hard problem to solve, right? If you like, if I'm now like, if I'm on a website and all of my interactions on that website is being collected and used to then train the model to personalize it, that's going to be evolving as I evolve, as my interaction as a user is going to change. And that I think that's also has changed over the last few years, right? There's definitely an increase of usage of lots of things, like, just maybe a small example, like my mom and my dad using LinkedIn, or just to read articles, or Facebook or something like that, Pinterest. Like, these are things that maybe weren't as accessible. So now we're not only are we collecting what wasn't possible before, but the amount of that, and then what we're doing with that is a little bit more sophisticated, right? Like this like collective, maybe not. But anyways, I just wanted to highlight the fact that, yeah, like a lot of these things around like, how do we find good labels for our training data sets? Like that's far from solved. And even if you could automate that, I'd be very weary of just like trusting that blindly. There's still a need to have someone supervise that process or ensure quality.
Mm-hmm. Big time. Yeah, it also seems too that you run into this. Yeah, I mean, there's enough bias in data itself, and you run into like bias in labeling and all those other interesting scenarios. And I mean, I'm glad people are spending a lot of mental cycles on this kind of stuff, right? It's because again, you rewind a few years ago, everyone was focused on how do I build models, right, and all this stuff, and not even taking into account like whether or not your data was good, or whether or not your labels were good, or whether or not your data was biased or anything like that. And so it's cool. I mean, there's a lot of things to pay attention to, right? It's like it's only going to get bigger.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's yeah. I mean, what are some big themes that you're seeing in MLOps right now?
So some trends that I feel like have been coming up a bunch. I mean, there's the monitoring piece that I think we kind of, like David mentioned before, data monitoring, and then just monitoring your models, and feels like there's a ton of startups that are popping up around that space. And again, follow the money, right? I learned that from The Wire season 3, I think. Everyone who it wasn't season 3, I can't even remember, but what a great show. And so the monitoring space, then the other space that I feel like there's a ton of money going into is the feature store space, right? So those are like the two that are getting money. Just if you go to a VC right now and you say, oh yeah, I got a feature store, I think they'll just write you a check and not even care about what your product is. But then as far as like inside, a bit more, at least what I'm hoping to try to start a conversation around more often than not is the ethical side of things, and not the question of like, hey, we can do this, or the question shouldn't be, can we do this? It should be, should we do this? Right? That's more of things that I'm trying to speak up about. So I'm bringing on more people that have that kind of say and have that kind of slant. So, but that's maybe my own personal trend that I'm starting, or I'm trying to start, like bringing bell bottoms back, and that hasn't happened yet. So anyway, the other thing that I think is really important for the whole MLOps community, and this is something that I saw a little bit in the beginning, but is coming up more and more, is the themes around security and how to do things securely, how to make sure that everything is really like it's safe, like locked down, right? And those questions I really like seeing come up, because again, there's so many pieces. Like I think the monitoring piece, what's really interesting is people don't know who should be the owner of a model once it goes into production. Is it the data scientist who should be the owner? Is it the ML engineer? Is it DevOps? Who's like getting the call at 3 a.m. when they find out the company just lost 200 grand because of rogue model, right? Like that's something that I think is not so clear yet. And so there's a lot of questions that are going around that, and hence a lot of companies that are trying to solve those or answer those questions. And then the other thing is security. Like there's still a lot of questions out there for security, whether it's security of like models or like security of the pipeline. There's so many pieces of the security that come into play, and I think that's starting to be talked about more and more. But David, what have you been seeing, man? What's come up?
I was actually going to say those two. Like, I'll add one more. Definitely security, definitely monitoring. The only other thing I could think of is interpretability. I think that there is now like people getting in trouble for the outputs of your models. It's related to the question of bias and quality and things of that nature. I think that space is definitely going to be more and more prevalent I think that companies are going to be interested in using that to inform strategy at their companies. Legal strategy, how do we protect ourselves? So I think that they're going to have to deal with that at one point or another, because that's just, again, data, like we talked, there's inherent bias in data for lots of different reasons. The randomness in the world, the way that we can't really observe everything and capture that, whatever the reasons are, we're going to have to deal with those things. So I think that other component is definitely going to be really popular. And then kind of just maybe a more recent trend I've been thinking about, and also my prediction, we were asked, like, is there going to be one tool to rule them all? I definitely don't think so. I think that we're going to see more and more people specializing on specific parts of the problem. And I think that the best in class will win and become more popular over time. So I kind of see that with this space where now there's someone focusing on just data labeling. Someone's focused on supervised monitoring. Again, like that's another really interesting one. Another one's, security. Like I was reading about, so actually someone in the community said that they were working on secure multi-party computation. So it's like, there's like all these new methods of computation that incorporate some of these more higher level concepts like fairness. And anyway, so I see that as well, more specialized vendors and open source projects. So a mixture of those things, caring about security, interpretability, monitoring, and specialization. Those are my forward-thinking trends.
And when we talk about like these best-in-class tools, I think when I spoke with Tim and Nathan, they're both VCs actually, and they were talking about like the current landscape, right? And one thing that Tim said that really had me thinking about this best in class is what happens when these best in class tools, right, that are being driven by their investors to get more money, they have to start like getting bigger and start eating more of the space. Right now they start off, they're super focused, like David was saying, they're solving this really, really niche pain point. And then they start to grow and grow. And then you see it overlap with this other best in class tool. And so your stack, and I look at it like this, like a classic example of this right now is Mlflow and DVC. Like DVC started out and it didn't play in the Mlflow land at all. And now it's grown, right? And they have a lot of overlap. And it seems like DVC is going for that Mlflow market. And so what is going to happen there? Like, are you going to use both because you really like the way that this tool does this certain thing, and then you're going to use this tool for that certain thing, although they both kind of do these certain things? Or are you going to just say, well, we can sacrifice on this part of the stack because we don't really care that much about it? So that's one thing that I think about as like, we look ahead and we look at the tools that are coming out and the way that they're going to grow and like try and take market share. And so that's that.
Yeah, it's interesting because these projects take on investor money with the expectation they're going to be unicorns, because that's just the expectation of anything these days, right? If you're not $1 billion, you're a total loser. But it is interesting. I was actually talking with another VC friend of mine, Sarah Catanzaro, about this a couple of weeks ago, about a lot of the same theme, right? So company A gets an investment. It's very good at this specific niche. And you have a valuation of maybe $30 million, maybe 100, whatever. You still got to 10x that if you're at 100. And so you're right. I mean, you start here and you're going to have to keep widening the gap, but then there's this overlap with these other, what I find interesting is, okay, you have overlap with the other 6 to 12 companies or whatever made up number in that specific niche, all with similarly talented founders, all with very well-respected VCs giving them money, right? And that's just one niche. Yeah. And now you have all these other niches. I don't even know how many niches there are in the MLOps space. I mean, it depends what you want to qualify as a niche, right? So yeah, I think to your point, it's like, okay, so do you start seeing cannibalization? Yeah. I think the way it's, because you have to grow, but I think at the end of the day too, you have to still continue being really good at what we started at, because if you go back to this simple positioning and marketing and branding, right? Like you can't occupy a brand isn't 6 different things to somebody. It's typically going to like occupy one position in your mind.
Totally.
And so even if you try to do this land and expand, it's like, you know, which one thing are you going to be best at? So to me, it's an interesting thought experiment because I look at the space right now and it's because there's no consolidation yet. I'm like, how would you identify winners in this space right now? If I'm an investor, for example, and I have to pick one company out of 100, thought experiment, right? Like, what's the what's the criteria to do that? If I have a punch pass and I only have 3 punches to make a bet on, how would I evaluate that? I don't know what your thoughts are on this.
It's a good thought experiment. And I think maybe I'm wrong, but something that just comes to mind is like adoption. I think that's maybe one metric, maybe one that's like one out of like a compound metric or something, but definitely taking into consideration how many people are using it. And I would even, again, it's tricky because enterprise, like some people just have a lot of money, so they can afford that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's like the best one. I don't know. I forget who it was that we were talking to, but they were essentially saying that sometimes the best things are like crap. Like, they're like these great, everyone uses this tool, but it's not like great, and if that is true, I wonder like then what that means. What does adoption mean? If everyone's using it, is that necessarily like, does that mean that this is a good tool?
I hear the argument. I hear that about Jira a lot.
I was going to say that exact same thing.
That's a Jira. Everyone's using Jira.
Yeah. Everyone shits on Jira all the time, but then they all use it. And this has been the case for at least 10 years, probably more.
Yeah, nothing's better than it, but it's that love-hate relationship, man.
Yeah. I guess there are some organizations or companies that there just isn't anything better, and so you just settle for that. You're like, you know what, I'm just gonna. They're the best in class, or they're the one that it's like the go-to thing. And yeah, the reasoning for why that happens, I think, is that there's a lot of things. Definitely, like I do believe that the community aspect actually plays a big part in the success of these. Because like think about like a regular ML engineer, data scientist. When they're thinking about what they're learning and how that plays into their work, they can't know everything. There's definitely going to be a few tools that are popular that they're aware of, and those things. If the more and more people that are like that, it just, to me, it feels like that would naturally lead to more and more companies using that tool as more and more people, like with Python, right? A lot of people are using Python, not necessarily because it's the best language for whatever it is that they're doing. It's just, there's a lot of people that know that language. It's very popular in the data science space. So I feel like, for all of these mixture of reasons, we end up using one tool more than the other. But yeah, I have to think more about like, what does success look like in this space?
And when it comes to community, like, and adoption, so there's a few things around that. Like the fact that you have a lot of GitHub stars does not, in my mind, equal adoption, right? Because there can be a ton of GitHub stars, but there might not be a thriving community around that. And so that needs to be, like, exactly to your point, David, is you got to have people that are using it and that are talking about it, that they're sending the pull requests, or they're trying to like make it better. And also they're telling their friends about it, and it's like, I don't know if ease of use is as important, because like we were talking about with Jira, but the important thing is that, you are looking at these metrics, and you're not fooling yourself with like vanity metrics around the community. And so I think about one, and it's wild when you start to look at the space, right? And you start to think about the tools out there that are being used. And I feel like the tool that everyone knows and that everyone has messed around with at least once, whether they love it or they're not such a fan of it, or they absolutely hate it, is Mlflow, right? Everybody's played around with that in some way or another. Because why? Like, it's the most popular right now when it comes to what I think it does. It's easy for data scientists to use, and it has enough like features to where other people think that, oh, well, at least for my take-home project, I'm going to mess around with it. Maybe they're not using it at the office, but most people, I feel like, if they haven't played around with it, they've definitely heard of it. Now you compare that to other tools that are in the same space that do not have that high adoption. And again, when it comes to the adoption, if you have problems or you have questions around it, or you like there's people that are building frameworks on top of Mlflow, right, to make Mlflow easier. So that's another thing. That's like a thriving community around that, and it shows that there's adoption. And when you look at other tools that are in that space, then it's not quite the same. Not to say that they're not as good, or they probably are better. I think about all of the different experiment tracking tools that there are right now, and there's some incredible ones out there. But if you ask anybody, what's the experiment tracking tools that you know about, I think you're gonna be hard pressed to find someone who doesn't mention Mlflow. And I'm not like a huge fan of Mlflow either, just so we make that clear. But it's the one that has so much adoption, and it has the community behind it.
Just one more thing on this this thought is companies or whatever, you're building some tool. If you keep other tools in mind, like you're aware of other competitors and you're aware of the value that they have, and I guess building that interoperability. I don't know if I'm saying that word, but like, I think that's also another important aspect of a tool and its success. Does it play nice with other tools? And even acknowledges maybe other tools that it believes it does it better. Like I'm thinking of Notion, and I always think about this, like Notion, they like explicitly tell you this is like Google Docs or like whatever feature it is, but you know that they're doing it a little bit better, or they're making it clear that there's other people that also do these things. And so they're not trying to solve all those problems, but they are playing nice with them. I think maybe that also will play into the future, like the success of an or a tool or some sort of org that's making something.
I mean, it's really interesting. And a couple of things come to mind. The first one is, I mean, is it better to be Apache Spark than be Mlflow? Or is it better to be Kubernetes than Kubeflow? You know what I'm saying? I mean, which one is going to have longer term success?
Ooh.
I have my take on this sort of stuff is kind of like how I view other things. Like I look at like Kubernetes and like this like low level infrastructure, like how I look at roads and like, basic infrastructure in our world. Like, think about what happened in Texas recently. Like when the water pipes froze, everything fell to shit. Like, and that I see production systems being very similar to that. Like if you don't have basic connectivity, you don't have a network where you can, like again, these sort of low level things, do you have enough memory? Do you have enough compute? I think it's always those things that are so central to like the life, these like, I don't know, like life-giving functions. I think those things will always have priority, but we'll get better at that. And so I don't know if how interesting that will always be, but I look at something like, AWS, these cloud providers, that's like an old kind of idea, rent someone else's computer. But I don't know, there's something new and so cool about it that I think that, I don't know if we're ever going to get bored of that.
So you feel like the higher you go up the stack, the less foundational it is? Like as you abstract away, it's like less of a foundational piece?
Maybe. I would love to. I don't have a well-formed thought on this, but at the moment, as I'm like reasoning through this, that's kind of where I'm leaning. I don't know, Joe, what do you think? It
reminds me of like actually the web framework debate that I remember back several years ago, where Elixir was actually the hot language. And so you saw, I think it was Phoenix or something that was like the framework, and everyone was into functional programming at the time. And it was interesting because it was this blip in a moment where I think people were staking their careers on Elixir and this web framework, and it's like, oh, nodes, all the JavaScript, whatever, Ruby's dead. Let's build on this, and fast forward to today, and I still think the good old standbys have kind of stuck around, right? Even Rails and Python to some extent, but then JavaScript obviously is by far the most dominant language in development. And it's just interesting because you see these moments where people try and unseat the incumbents, and it's incredibly difficult to do. I think part of it is it's what's known as the Lindy effect, which means that actually in technology, the longer something's been around, actually, the better chance it's going to be around in the future. SQL is another example of this. So you had, the NoSQL movement in the late 2000s, early 2010s, and I remember when hearing from data people that, oh yeah, SQL is dead. You should just forget about that. And fast forward to today, and like things like Spark, which were much more programming specific with Scala and to a lesser extent Python back then. Now it's like Spark SQL is a first class citizen. RDDs have gone by the wayside at this point, and so it's kind of like. But now the question is, okay, so if you look at the progression now, if you have like Spark and then MLflow on top of it, like MLflow's success is largely dependent on the future of Spark, right? Yeah. Kubeflow is the same way with Kubernetes, and if that somehow changes, then I guess it changes. You saw this with Hadoop. Actually, I think that's a really classic example where you had Hive, and even classic Hadoop and all these other Dremel and all these other technologies built on it. But then cloud computing came along and just sort of like, HDFS. How many people do you know who run HDFS these days? I don't know. I mean, I know a few, but it's
I know a few. Yeah.
Dude, and it's so crazy to think about a world where Kubernetes is not around, because we're so deep in Kubernetes right now. Yeah. It's when you say Kubeflow is contingent on the success of Kubernetes, I'm like, there's no way Kubernetes is going to not win. But it's so true. It's very true that this is a possibility. And
that's tech, right? Tech constantly evolves. I just want to say one note, and this is just a thought, but as an engineer, I've always tried to be technology agnostic, to focus on being a good problem solver rather than knowing how to just know this API or I memorize some things. And I think that just, I want to bring that up here because I think that also is going to play in the success of an individual or an organization. Like you're focusing on the things that are essential. So like you mentioned, like with Hadoop, there is something that's common there to Kubernetes, right? Like, or there's similarities. There's like common design patterns that I think overlap. And it's like, looking at those things and focusing on those patterns are probably more worthwhile than like being so tool specific. Because even with these tools, they embody some idea. Like I'm thinking of like SQL, like this ability to like materialize data from some view. Like that's like a lot of different tools are doing that. But the ones that survive I'm always, like you mentioned SQL, like that's such a good one because like, is it the best one? I don't know, but I know most people know how to use that. Like it's like the standard, query language for relational databases. And for like Hadoop is also a really good one because that's like another one that you see like a lot of people use it, right? But a lot of other people are like, nah, that's like old. They look at that as like a yarn cluster. Like I rarely see a lot of support for that in a lot of these other tools. But Kubernetes is something that you're seeing more and more. But I don't think that there's nothing that would stop it from being around forever. There's no guarantee that it will be around forever.
Yeah.
And I think that's okay, right? Like we kind of want that. If there's something better, I mean, maybe we'll have to learn new skill sets, but that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. And I also think, back to the niche discussion too, like when companies start in a niche and then have to branch out, it's sort of this interesting, I just made up this term, but like TAM gravity, total addressable market gravity, right? So as you need to increase your valuation, as you say, you have to follow the money, right? So you're not going to go into like the least popular niche. You're going to go into the most popular one, but so is everybody else. It's this weird game theory aspect where you have no incentive but to go into, the most popular thing. So you just have this interesting tragedy of the commons at some point where like everybody's invaded the space.
That's a good example because that like I'm sure like this like what we're talking about tragedy of the common, like these things happen in other things, right? So it's like the adoption of things, like I look at like languages as another cool example of something that no one person created but we all just kind of agreed upon. Same thing with money. Like these are things that Yeah, they're like I don't know, like gold. Gold has been a money for a long time, and there's reasons why it's popular, but so could anything else be. Right now we have bitcoins, digital money, so it's like new technology in general will always. I think it's constantly changing, right? So yeah. Anyway, that was a cool thought.
I had a random point that we made back a few minutes ago, but when we spoke with Noah Giff, he mentioned how he like doesn't recommend anyone to use these startups in the space because of the nature, like the volatility, and you could be using and the sad part is, so all right, let me start with this. I'll give you the breakdown and then I'll tell you why I don't like it, but I do understand it. And so he recommends everybody just goes on the cloud, right? Like whatever your cloud provider is, whether you're using AWS or Azure, you use their cloud native tools because of the volatility and how these companies may or may not be around tomorrow, right? And my problem with that is, and so I understand the argument that you could base your whole startup, you could get your infrastructure built around a few like best in class tools, and then these best in class tools don't stick around and it messes things up. Or what he said is that he had built a startup around a certain language, like it was all built in this certain language. I can't remember which one it was, but after a few years that language like went out of fashion. And then how do you find engineers that know that language now? And all of a sudden he's looking at it going like, oh no, we can't hire anybody because nobody knows this language. Or if we do hire someone, we got to get them up to speed with the language, and then we got to get them up to speed with our own personal repo. And it was just a mess. So he was like a big advocate of like, stay safe, play it safe, especially if you're a startup. And if you're a bigger company and you've got that foundation, then you can start messing around with some of these best in class tools. Now, my problem with that is it creates like this dystopian future where we're all just like giving all our money to Azure and AWS. And like, I don't give enough money to Amazon every month buying stuff on, especially during the pandemic. Then everyone's going to be on AWS. Like, man, I don't like the way that looks. I want like startups to win and I want them to take market share, but I do understand the reality of the situation. Like the last company that I worked at was Dot Science, and Dot Science went out of business, and we had customers and they had to figure out what they were going to do next. Sadly, like that's life. So there is that part of things. And then the other thing that I was going to mention on this, what was the phrase that you coined just now, Joe? The
TAM gravity.
TAM gravity. Along those lines, like David and I spoke with this guy Carl, and he works at LinkedIn, and his vision, and I think we talked about this even when you were on the meetup, his vision of like the data warehouse, and basically like Snowflake and Databricks are on a collision course towards each other. And it makes total sense when you are talking about this, because they're not going to go into these smaller markets. When Databricks is thinking about like, how can we grow? They're not going to think like, oh, well, let's
build a feature store.
Yeah, exactly. Like, well,
right?
Actually, I think they might be building.
Right, yeah, it's probably a bad example, actually.
That's so funny.
But they're not thinking about like these niches of the super niches that we were talking about, right? They're looking at like, where's the most money being thrown at stuff, and Snowflake just IPO'd for $1 billion, so let's try and take them on, right? So the collision course, I think, is super interesting to think about, and how these companies are. I like what you said earlier, like potentially going to, what did you say, cannibalize themselves?
Yeah, and take up more share within the niche, right? To Noah Giff's point too. I mean, he's a friend of mine, so and I think he is. There's aspects where I think he's right. We're playing it safe, but the cloud provider is, I think, a potentially safe option. The thing you got to understand too about the cloud providers is, I mean, AWS their products are run basically as startups within a startup, right? And so that's not to say you're going to get either the best tooling available or that project's going to be around. I think AWS is a good deprecation policy. Google Cloud, I mean, for better or for worse, full disclosure, I'm a Google partner, but I think they do have a reputation of deprecating things and killing things off, and it's kind of bit them a bit, right? Where, a common criticism I hear of Google is, and I would say a concern is, I could move my workloads to Google, but I guess I don't know that they're going to support this product, right? And so that's a trust issue at that point. And let alone too, like, all these products in these clouds, I mean, they are just run by teams. It's not like there's some overarching, they're run by teams and they're getting funding, but it's not the same dynamic as you would have with a VC funded operation where, you have to go out and just, and kill it. I think the interesting dynamic too, though, is with these small MLOps companies, for example, right? And their ability to coexist with a cloud or with the clouds, because the reality is you're going to have to work with these clouds. But I know from experience, the way that, say, the cloud sales team works, for example, if you're a sales rep for, say, AWS, Azure, or whatever, the way you're incentivized and comped is by selling the products that your company represents, or that ML company should probably be in the marketplace of these clouds, because that's also how sales reps comped. So if you're trying to land a deal in a company, for example, right, and in this, say you're an MLOps company trying to land a deal, but you're also going head to head with like Azure or AWS in that same account, you may have the better technology, but from just a sheer firepower standpoint, you might be out of luck in that deal. You're going to have to make a pretty convincing argument that, we can come in, expand on this cloud in a way that this cloud is going to be happy with. So that's just kind of the reality of the kind of the sales cycle of this stuff too. Is that it's you should partner.
Exactly, and when their company, like if you're trying to sell to this company and that company's already spending $50,000 a month on AWS, and then you have to go through as a startup through procurement and all of that stuff, and the data scientist is like, I just want to get this in and start playing around with it like next week, and with AWS I can do that, but with you guys it's going to be a bit of a hassle. So there is that. One great point you made though was like how projects do get killed at Google and AWS and Azure. And it just made me think about, where's Google Glass? What happened, man? Where is my Google Glass?
It's with your bell bottoms. It'll come back at some point. So
it'll be back. Just wait. Just got to wait another decade.
There are going to be hipsters wearing Google Glass, so. And Google glasses that actually don't have any functionality, just like hipsters wear glasses with fake lenses. These are real lenses, by the way. But
that's so funny, man. That's such a great point too.
Yeah, but it's interesting just seeing the space and kind of where it is right now. But that's something I tell a lot of my friends that work at or run these ML ops startups, especially, is like for better or for worse, you're going to have to work with the clouds to try and become a technology partner. Because if you aren't, you're out of sight, out of mind, and unless you're that awesome, it's just you just have an uphill battle. I mean, even Snowflake, I mean, they partnered with all the clouds to the point where I can make a pretty good argument they beat these clouds at their own game, right?
Which is another funny one. When I was talking to somebody yesterday, and I was like, "Are you going to open source this project that you have?" They had something in house, and he was like, "Well, I've been looking at the license because I don't want Amazon to come along and start selling it as a managed service. Like if I do open source it, so I have to figure out some clause that makes sure that is not possible."
Yeah, I don't know how that's gonna fare for your friend, but and I don't know much about this space, but I still, again, maybe I don't know, I'm naive, but it does seem like those who are willing to form partnerships will survive. And even just my own personal preference, when I'm looking at tools, that's actually something that I like. How well do you play with other people, like a cloud provider, other in the stack? Like that shows that you're not afraid, like, or maybe not afraid, but like I don't know. It's like there's like this inclusiveness, this openness, which I think it says something about the company. But maybe that's again to their benefit. But I don't have a problem with there being mutually beneficial. Like that's okay. It's not a problem for me.
Especially if you're going to start tacking on best of breed technologies, like you kind of want them to work together, right? Either there's going to have to be some open standard where everyone agrees to communicate, and then that might help things. Otherwise, I mean, yeah, you're going to have to work with others because that's just the nature of how these are going to interoperate. Because your other alternative is to have a gigantic one size fits all pipeline. I think we're all in agreement. We've moved past those days.
Yeah. Monoliths don't fare very well in this like distributed world, and I think that's the same applies to orgs. So the way that you find, even I would even say at like the team level, I think, and someone asked me the other day about building a machine learning infrastructure team, and like I talked about the type of people that I think should be a part of that, but it's a mixture. It shouldn't be just one thing. I think to have true success in any field, you need to have multiple perspectives. It can't just be this one thing. And yeah, I think about that at like all levels of abstraction.
Yes, getting deep. So
I was going to say something and I totally forgot. David threw me off my guard.
damn it, David.
Yeah. I can't even remember what you were saying before David spoke, Joe. I got lost in his words.
That's fine.
Niches, we were talking about that and the cloud and
how they play well
so
together. I can't remember. Whatever.
Yeah. Well, cool. We're actually coming up on an hour now, so we can probably start wrapping it up. But yeah, I mean, bringing it back to MLOps community. I mean, what's next for you guys?
Ooh.
Yeah, I think we have some really exciting things. I'll preface that, but by saying that like we're still working on a lot of these things. But one thing that I am excited to announce, and I think it's okay, is that we're getting more people on our team. We're building the MLOps organization, like the organizers is what we're calling ourselves, and that's really cool because we're getting more people from the community that are invested in the community now participating in that. And that's something that I'm a big fan of. I've always been a proponent of the content, the things that we talk about in our podcast, in our blogs, anywhere. It's community source. Like I'm no expert, and I want to hear from experts. And I think that that's something that you're going to see more of. You're going to see other people helping me and Demetrios out. Another thing that I think is really cool is we're trying to shape our content to make it more educational. We want to make this space a little bit easier to navigate, as there's a lot of great information and a lot of websites and orgs that are good at putting a lot of information, but I don't think it's formatted in a way that someone could learn easily. And as a former educator, I have an interest in like making that a little bit easier to start up with, and defining some of those basics that we all maybe assume that everyone knows. And so I have a desire for for a lot of the content to be more educational. And we're definitely ramping up these engineering labs. I would love for Demetrios, he's been keeping up with that a little bit more. But what we're doing there is essentially, building these like real life production challenges. And we've already seen a lot of great involvement in that. And I'm so excited to see more initiatives like that coming out of the community. It could be something completely different. The idea is that these are community-led initiatives, and what me and Demetrios are going to be doing, the organizers are going to be doing in the community, is facilitating that and making sure that grows healthy. And there's going to be all sorts of other ideas. So yeah, just a preview.
Exactly. I mean, the engineering labs right now, I think there's two things that are very much priorities in our eyes, and one is the engineering labs, and it's so cool. We just got done with the first voyage or cohort, whatever you want to call it, but the greater vision for it is that it's it plays a little bit off of Kaggle for data scientists, but it's for machine learning operations, right? So maybe we don't have I hope that we don't have people posting on LinkedIn that they're like number 4 MLOps engineering lab.
Grandmaster MLOps engineering.
Yeah.
Four-time grandmaster, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope we don't get to that point, but like I said, I'm just going with the flow at this point, and who knows where it'll go from here. But I got to give a shout out to my man Ivan, who's been like the powerhouse behind this. He really drove it, and so I'm around in the background, but Ivan is, or AKA Leonardo, is the one who is really like making sure that things are happening with that. We've got blog posts coming out from the first voyage of what people did, and we gave them some constraints, right? The only constraints that we gave them actually were that they have to use Mlflow and PyTorch, and then we like threw them into the ocean and said go swim, and they did a pretty good job. So we had 4 teams, 2 teams came out, and they created some awesome stuff. And really, I think what was the coolest about it is that they got to practice, they got to work in groups with people from all over the world, and they got to use this tool that perhaps they've only played around with on their own or they had heard about, So next up, though, what we decided is that we're going to give them an actual problem, because we got feedback, right? We're always trying to iterate. We got some complaints of people being like, we didn't know what to do. You just told us to use these tools and we didn't have an actual real life problem to solve. We didn't have any data sets to use. We didn't know how to do this. So we're going to do something a little different for the next one, which is give them an actual problem to solve and then tell them what kind of frameworks or what kind of tools to use also. And it is my hope that we get them to use or to solve a problem that is in partnership with some kind of NGO, or potentially we're talking with the UN right now. One of the guys in the community, Mark, is a former, he worked for the UN, and they've got a lot of data and they've got a lot of things that they want to do with that data. They got a lot of data scientists, but they don't really have ways to get that out, and they don't have the expertise, the MLOps expertise. So we want to take it and do something for good, so that it's not just like this pet project that is there and you can clone the repo or whatever. It's like, no, people can actually use this and get value from it, and it's helping the world. It's big words. So that's like the first major initiative. And then what David was saying was the like educational piece. We're trying to do that with the website. I don't know when this is going out, but potentially by the time this actually gets put up on the internet, we will have a new website up, and we'll be able to say like, go there, check out what we're doing as far as all of the past meetups, the present meetups, all of that, and then the different pieces of the machine learning pipeline and how they coexist, and then all the different vendors in the space. Like, I think there's a ton of information, like David said, there's a ton of information out there about different pieces of the puzzle, right? But you don't really get this view of like all of it, what I should know, and then you don't know, like, you see those everyone has seen those like slides with a million different logos on them, right? You've seen so many logos, and it's all like the little font where it says these, this is pipelining tools, and these are monitoring tools, and all of that. We've all seen that, but what we're trying to do is make that easier to navigate. And so what we want to do is, for all of those different pieces of the puzzle, we have a page dedicated to it, and then we have all of the tools that you could get, all the startups in that space, and then you can compare them against one another. So right now we're sourcing this framework. We're going to all of the different vendors, and we're saying like, okay, you are a serving platform, like for example, Selden or Algorithmia. Now here's this doc. Give me all of the features that you think should be included on the website for like a serving platform. And then they add all of that in, and then all of the different companies or startups, or even, the big cloud companies, are going to fill that in. And so you can compare one against the other and say, well, I wanted to do this and I like that, but let's see, like, how does AWS fare against Algorithmia, for example, or how does Selden differ from KF Serving? And so that's the idea right now. That's like a huge thing that I've been trying to work on, and it feels like it's always taken too long, but I kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. So that's it. That's what we
It's
got.
a big endeavor.
Yeah.
But in a nutshell, I think we're scaling up. We're scaling up our efforts. And that's like one, and also organizing our efforts. Where me and Demetrios, when we first started this, we were kind of just like trying things out, and now we're getting more feedback, learning from our mistakes, getting other people involved. So I think you're going to see the MLOps community mature as an organization.
That's so amazing. That's so awesome. Like I'm so stoked on what you guys are doing. There's like, it seems like everything's starting to click, starting to connect, right? And my gut tells me too, there's going to be an interesting open source project or startup that comes out of the MLOps community.
Oh, that would be so cool.
I would love that. Yeah. And that, like we were talking about, like community source things. I definitely think about things like that, like just cool things coming out of like this, it's like a good platform for other people.
Platform's a really good way of putting it. That's what I think. It seems like that's what you guys are building as a really big platform.
Honestly, that's really how I look at it. Like when we interview people, I want you to meet this person. I want you to know about this person, what they're doing. Again, it's not about us. It's very like outward showing. And I look at here, I send my coworkers, hey, check out what's going on there. There's cool things going on. Again, it's for jobs, for networking, for learning, and just for chatting it up. I think talking shop sometimes. I like that because, I was coming from a different industry. So I didn't really have that community aspect. Here I got that. I got to talk shit with other engineers and just like, hear about their complaints are similar to mine. And so, yeah, I think a platform is probably the best way to think about it.
That's so awesome.
And I will say that one highlight, we just booked the godfather of MLOps to come on. The dude, I don't know if you know D. Scully, the one who wrote, what is it? The high interest debt, credit card debt.
Oh yeah, that's such a great paper.
Yeah. So
yeah,
he said he confirmed he's going to come on to the podcast and talk with us, and that's something for me is like this a year ago. If you would ask me, what I would be doing now, and if I could have been talking with people of that caliber, I would have said no way. But somehow, man, the stars aligned, and now I have no right talking to these people, but they agree to it, so I'm not going to say no. And that's what, so awesome. That's what I'm pretty excited about.
Damn, good for you guys. Well, cool. I think it's probably a good place to end it, but love to chat again. Either I can show up on your podcast or whatever, but it's been a really good chat. I think we could probably chat for hours actually. So
yeah. Thank you.
Of course,
so good, man.
Yeah,
really so good.
And again, congrats on your success. I'm really genuinely excited for you guys.
Thank you, Joe.
It's really cool to hear. So
thanks,
cool.
man.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us. It was such a pleasure, and everyone listening, wish you a great rest of the day.
Yeah. Awesome. Next time we do this, we gotta like create our own theme song for the intro. You send me some synth tracks, and then I'll put some guitar over them or something.
That'd be kind of fun, actually.
I love that. Yeah, I love that.
So this is so random. Everybody's probably already shut it off by now. But David, I think when was it? Probably like 6 or 7 months ago when feature stores started like coming up all the time. Randomly, I just sent David a voice message on WhatsApp and was like, dude, we should make a feature store rap. And here's what it'll be like. It'll be like feature store, 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 feature. And then we'll just do mumble rap for the rest of the song. So that one is in the works. That's what I should have said I'm most excited about for.
Oh, it is not. We're not doing that rap song.
It sounds like it's really going to make a career if you do this. So,
I don't know in which way it'll make it, but it'll make it do something.
You'll be interviewing like a bunch of rappers and ML engineers on your podcast, and I guess it's going to turn to the Joe Rogan show at some point.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Oh man.
Which wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but yeah.
So. Yeah. Exclusively on Spotify. So That's it, man. Thanks again, Joe, for doing
course,
this.
yeah.
This was often awesome. I wasn't sure if I had anything to say, but you ask great questions.
Likewise.
And
I think we all feed off each other really well. So
yeah,
looking forward to the next time we chat. So until then,
Cool, awesome.
yeah. All right. Have a good weekend, guys. We'll see.
You too, man. Take care, man. Bye-bye.